Lawyers of Reddit, what was the best gotcha moment you ever experienced? Story 1. I acted for a plumber who ripped up a tile floor to replace a pipe. He installed new tile on top but warned the owners not to walk on it for 48 hours. He emphasized not to let their kids or their dogs walk on it either. They walked on it but alleged the defects were caused by improper install. We had an expert do a report which confirmed that it was consistent with proper installation, but people walking on it too soon. Crazy homeowners still went to trial on it. In their evidence disclosure they included a series of pictures. One of the pictures had in the foreground a tile that was tilted upwards. The background very clearly showed a dog's paw pressing down on the other end of the tile. That wasn't so much an I got them situation as they got themselves. Story 2. I had client whose $60K car was ruined by a shop that put in the wrong oil. We couldn't prove it at first. The engine blew up, oil leaked out and evidence was lost. I subpoenaed their bank records, figured out they bought their oil from Costco, called Costco and got their prices for the last 2 years. I then worked out the amounts they were spending, did some backhand math, and showed based on the values it was impossible they had ever bought the right oil. They settled in full immediately. Story 3. Told this story a few years back, but everything old is new again. My brother is a divorce attorney. His most memorable case, he was representing a guy in a divorce custody battle who was accused of horrific child abuse. Very graphic, very detailed depositions from the young kids against daddy. Things look grim. Then my brother notices the deposition transcript done by social workers under oath contains a question at the end from one of the kids: did I hit my marks? My brother had previously tried to make it as an actor in Hollywood right out of high school, failing miserably and decided to go into law, an altogether different form of acting. He wonders how little kids know about acting jargon. Subpoenas the wife's personal checking ACCT during discovery. Sure enough, acting lessons, deposes an extremely sketchy acting coach, and panicked coach quickly coughs up DVDs of practice interrogations with the kids, hours of coaching the kids on exactly what imaginary things to say about daddy. He says it was his one and only Perry Mason moment in 20 years of practice, and dad got sole custody of the kids. Story 4. Had a client accused of leading the cops on a high-speed chase. The cop on the stand estimated he was going 90 miles per hour, but never actually clocked him. Then the cop identified where the chase started with me, and where it ended. It lasted about 2 miles, then we went through his log of when it started and when it ended. About 3.5 minutes. Once you walk through the math on that, the average speed of this chase was 35 miles per hour. Client got acquitted really quickly after that. Story 5. I was suing a landlord who failed to make serious repairs in order to force the tenant out. The hard part is proving bad intent instead of mere idiocy, so you get higher damages. Code enforcement was involved, so I request those records. The landlord left a voicemail to the enforcement department saying to hold off on the fines. They will make the repairs as soon as the tenant is forced out. That was an easy case. Story 6. I was representing mom in a bitter custody fight. Dad wanted full custody and argued mom was an unfit parent. Mom wanted full custody because dad had a history of domestic violence towards her and the kids. Dad's lawyer was doing a good job of painting her in a bad light during his cross-examination, and I was starting to get worried. His lawyer brought a close family friend as a character witness for dad, who said the usual nice things about dad. Then he said something about them owning chickens. I thought that was odd, so I asked more questions. I was able to get the friend to spill the beans that the dad owned chickens for illegal fighting, and he'd take his minor children to these fights. And when the children were acting up, he'd punish them by forcing them to feed the chickens, during which they would get pecked and scratched by the chickens. And obviously, the children were terrified of those chickens. I could see the color draining from dad's lawyer's face. Mom got full custody. Story 7. Someone told me this. The lawyer was describing the theft. The footprints make it seem as though he didn't go to the basement, and the defendant said, actually we did. Story 8. This is so petty. I've had much bigger moments, but because of the character of the other side this will always be my favorite. Doing a boundary dispute, a squabble over what was essentially a few inches of land. OS was a lawyer, and an absolute. He was acting for himself. The whole a lawyer who acts for himself as a fool for a client thing was bang on for him, but he was a deeply unpleasant guy, a bully who thought that he was the smartest guy in the room. Part of his case hinged on wheelie bins and how prior to the boundary having been moved there wasn't space to store a full-size bin beside the house. The fact you now could meant clearly the boundary must have moved. That was the extent of his evidence. It really was thin stuff. During the actual trial he pulled a fast one by suddenly producing an old aerial photo, ostensibly to show the boundary at the front of the property had also moved a fast one, because you have to disclose stuff like that in advance. You can't just sit on something relevant and then suddenly whip it out at trial with a flourish. Whilst he was making his submissions that it should be admissible, I looked more closely at it. Away from the bit of the boundary he said it was relevant to and realized that it very clearly showed a wheelie bin in exactly the spot his case said there couldn't be one. Told the judge we were happy for the photo be admitted after all. Got the other side to confirm the date it was taken. Then pointed out head just completely his case. That photo did him for nearly $50K in adverse costs. Couldn't happen to a more deserving chap. Story 9. I was deposing a guy in a large breach of contract fraud action. I asked him if he'd ever been convicted of a crime. He said no. Later in the day, asked him the question again, and there was no objection and he answered no. I then whipped out his indictment for felony fraud and his conviction for misdemeanor conspiracy. and he denied it was him until I started asking about his co-conspirator, his son, and then he gave me the "oh yeah, I remember something about that." Story 10. My brother is an attorney. He had a case where the guy said he was permanently disabled from a work accident. At a deposition, my brother overheard the guy talking about getting his house remodeled. He was already spending the money he thought he was getting. My brother drove by the house to see how much work was being done and saw the guy carrying bundles of roofing shingles up a ladder to the roof. This was before smartphones, so he drove to a Best Buy and bought a video camera, went back and recorded the guy. He had copies made and sent to the other attorney. The guy dropped the suit and was back at work the following Monday. My brother's client didn't want to pay for the video camera. He saved them thousands of dollars. They eventually paid, but he still gets a little peeved when he talks about it. Story 11. The first case I ever did. Opposing counsel misplaced the copy of my client's driver's license. Rather than admitting his mistake and asking me to resend it, he filed a motion to compel, claiming we never sent it. Well, I was able to provide proof that we'd sent it to him like 8 months ago, so the judge was rather displeased with his antics. Story 12. Worked as paralegal investigator, working a trade secrets case involving the manufacture of dental wheels used to grind teeth. Long story, but go with it. Company A was a small family-owned manufacturer but made the best product on the market from a small factory in the middle of nowhere, sold massive amounts of product because of quality. Its location was remote enough and the owner paid employees so well, the employees stayed there forever. All of them had worked there for 30 years. When the founder of Company A died, it was sold to International Company B because the kids and grandkids had no interest in the company. Company B then closed the old factory and tried to use Company A's formula at their facilities. Company B couldn't make the formula work. Now enter Company C, another international company who lost the bid on buying Company A. When Company C heard about the problems Company B was having, they bought the old factory facilities and then rehired the old staff to restart production. All the employees of old Company A were delighted to have their good-paying jobs back and went straight to work, producing the better quality items once again, and Company C's product worked. Company B sues Company C for trade secrets violation. When you buy a company, you buy their trade secrets, and this company had a bunch. This product was just one part, but the most profitable part of their operation. Thus Company C, because of their action, was accused of violating the laws governing trade secrets. Company B even managed to get a temporary restraining order against Company C in federal court, and Company C had to stop manufacturing at the old plant now owned. This is when I enter the picture. Our firm represented Company C and I was assigned to interview all the employees. I was in the living room of this delightful older lady in her late 50s that offered me snacks, asked me if I was married and wanted to set me up with her granddaughter. You name it, best and funniest interview ever. Then she drops the bomb. I asked her how she knew how to make the product. All my previous interviews said so and so taught them. She said, from the directions on the wall. Total moment of silence. Directions on the wall. Yes, she said, no one ever looks ATM, but there is a board on the wall with the directions. I called the janitor of the facility from her phone. Yeah, this is before cell phones, and had him meet me there. He unlocks the place and yep, covered in probably 40 years of dust making it just part of the background, is a board with the entire process on it. Thus, when Company B sold the factory, which was eventually purchased by Company C, Company B accidentally sold the trade secret to Company C because they abandoned it on the wall. I did serious evidence sourcing on this. My best pictures were of the 65-year-old former janitor knocking the dust off the pages, taking the entire board off the wall, putting it in paper bag, and sealing it so I never touched it. Every picture he smiled for the camera. His foo expression was priceless in every picture. They were so freaking funny. The judge in federal court was laughing his off when he heard the details of what I found to reverse the restraining order. When he opened the bag, he laughed even more. The factory reopened immediately. Company B and C settled by agreeing that they both got to use the trade secret but couldn't sell it to anyone else. What they really figured out was, those little old ladies had slightly changed the formula over the years and slightly made them better over time. Even the formula on the wall didn't work as well as these little ladies did. Story 13. When I was a prosecutor, I had a guy who was representing himself. He was charged with car theft and evading. He was actually able to escape the cops for quite a distance and was captured later. His defense was that he wasn't the person. I got his calls from jail and he talked so much to his girlfriend about how he had committed the crimes. The look on his face when I told him that I was providing him copies of his jail calls was great. Edit. I remember an even funnier thing. I had another guy who was representing himself. It was a residential burglary, and one of the elderly neighbors saw the defendant running from the house. At trial, the defendant was cross-examining the witness and he asked, "Now when you saw this person running away?" And the witness said, I saw you running away." Story 14. In a protective order hearing, a respondent admitted on cross that he choked his partner. His attorney looked like his head was going to explode. The judge still only granted an order not to abuse. He wouldn't grant the stay away or any other relief we asked for. Go figure. Story 15. Plaintiff alleged he was so injured in an auto accident that he couldn't work, do any regular activities, or pick up his young kids. He then posted on his public FB profile him doing the ice bucket challenge. If you're not familiar, he basically lifted a huge cooler filled with ice water over his head. His attorney had no idea he had posted it. Story 16. TLWR told a judge to shove his threats up his and pay my client. The judge paid my client. While doing SSA disability hearings a few years ago, I represented a guy in a case that was back on remand from federal court. Long story short, the original administrative law judge ALJ didn't follow the correct procedure and denied the guy because he could return to his last work step 4. Basically, he was granted a partially favorable decision that gave him $700 a month, rather than the $2,100 he should have received. The ALJs are notoriously, and try to scare people out of pursuing claims. This judge apparently thought he could intimidate me and my client into withdrawing the appeal by threatening to take away all the guy's benefits. Little did he know, I'm not a moron, and I hate bullies. He started the hearing by asking my client if he was aware that he could take all his benefits away, asking if your counsel has informed you that by continuing this hearing, you may lose all benefits and owe all amounts back to the agency as an overpayment. This was completely impossible, because 6 years had gone by since the original decision, and the judge could only reopen the decision within 2 years. The guy was bulletproof on this issue. Also, the job he previously did, computer system installer, was completely obsolete and physically impossible since his physical problems prevented him from lifting more than 20 pounds, and the computer he was installing during the 1980s were 50 to 150 pounds. The judge didn't think about that, and clearly didn't read the federal court remand notice. So long story short, the judge says to me, "Counsel, have you done your ethical duty and advised your client that he could lose all his benefits today?" To which I responded by looking at my client, and in a full voice saying, "He can't do that." Then, without missing a beat, looked back at the judge and said, "Your Honor, I have advised my client that you cannot take his benefits away. I told the judge we would waive all other procedural portions of the hearings and proceed directly to vocational expert testimony." I asked the vocational expert 2 questions. Would the prior job require lifting more than 20 pounds? And has the prior job existed as performed since 1999? She quickly answered no to both questions and then on her own elaborated all the reasons why. Total hearing was 6 minutes long. The judge had no choice but to grant the original application, and the guy got $158,000 in unpaid benefits, and $1,400 a month more than he had been receiving. He broke down into tears and said he could finally keep the promise to his wife to return her ashes to the beach they got married on in Hawaii. A dream he had years ago decided would be impossible. Best day of my career. So far, edit. Wow, thank you so much for all the positive comments and support. I don't feel like I did anything special. I just did my job. It was sweet to shove it down that judge's throat though. To everyone out there struggling or with a family member struggling with the disability system, I wish you the best of luck. Unfortunately, it requires having a good judge, and in some places, looking at Seattle, that's almost impossible. The system is rigged against people, but there are some good things that happen. And yes, I represented some people that probably weren't disabled and won some. Mental health is the worst of it, and where the most injustice happens. For those of you struggling with those issues, please go to therapy, take the medication, be honest with your providers, and advocate for greater care levels. Without the evidence, it's almost impossible to win, no matter how objectively disabled the person may be. I've got a bunch of other stories that are like this. This is just one that always sticks out to me, primarily due to the client's tears and sense of hope for his wife's ashes, something he'll never forget. Best of luck to everyone out there, and take care of each other. We're all we've got. Cherish life. Story 17. Not a lawyer, but when I was in the military I was accused of something I didn't do, and I had to go to court over it. And during court the prosecutor started to detail this investigation and how they had staked my apartment out for months. They entered into evidence a picture of my apartment. And when they put it up I looked shocked at my lawyer. BC, it wasn't a picture of my place. It was my ex-wife's apartment. A place I had never lived, never even spent a single night there. I lived in a house, she lived in an apartment. And when my lawyer was asked if she objected to the picture being entered into evidence, she replied, "I don't mind them entering it into evidence as long as they change the listing of it." And when one of the members of the panel, no judge, 3-member board, asked what was wrong with the listing, she looked at him and said that's not his apartment. On top of this, the witness they used against me described going to my house on the night in question, and she named the subdivision where she had visited me. Except that wasn't where I lived either, also wasn't where the picture they had was either. Case was dismissed, and I was told they requested the witness to return to answer questions about perjury. Story 18 represented a DUI client who swore up and down to me he hadn't been drinking or doing any drugs. Newbie officer who had his field training officer with him in the car. Rookie pulls client over for a tag violation, walks back to the car with body camera still on. Training officer says get him out for a DUI, and the rookie says but he's not intoxicated, to which the reply was do it anyway. Body cam clicks off, turns on 7 minutes later, and they're doing field sobriety exercises on my client. Client sat in custody for 3 weeks until I finally got the tape from the prosecutor and presented it to the judge. The looks from the prosecutor and FTO when the judge saw the tape. He'll treasure that one. Judge wrote the police chief a letter saying the FTO was dead to him and he'd deny every search warrant he tried to bring thereafter for being a liar. Client is hopefully still on track with his civil attorney in a lawsuit. Story 19. My client's house burned down from an explosion in the fuel oil tank used to heat the house. It was clearly the oil maintenance company's fault, but his homeowner's insurance from a very reputable company still refused to pay out, citing a ridiculous technicality in his policy. Essentially, the policy covered damage caused by the oil heater, but they claimed that it was the storage tank that exploded and wasn't part of what was covered. so they deny his claim, which was about 2 million, and then I get involved. During a deposition with a claims adjuster, I ask how she came to the conclusion that the storage tank was not a part, or at least connected to, the heater. She states that she relied on her expert witness who was an engineer. Little did she know I had already checked this person's background. He had zero engineering experience or education. As most of you might know, you don't get attorney's fees in most cases, however, when an insurance company denies your claim in bad faith. Now you do. Her little admission cost the company about $500K in fees, on top of the original claim for 2 million. Story 20 obligatory, not a lawyer, but my grandparents had the longest running divorce settlement in LA history in the 70s. My grandpa refused to pay his alimony. One year, he went to Hawaii and sent my grandma a postcard that said something along the lines, but more wittingly, "I'm enjoying all of your alimony money, look at what I'm doing with it." She drove it straight to her lawyer, and it was game over for Gramps. Edit 1. The divorce was about 5 years long. It was the longest divorce in their city at the time. I'm sure it isn't anymore. Edit 2. My grandpa was ordered to pay her a few $1,000s a month, plus health insurance, car insurance, a car, and a few other things, until she got a job or remarried. Grandma chose to do neither. To this day, he is sending her a check. She can't medically drive anymore, but her car is rotting in the garage, just to spite him, so he has to pay the car insurance bills. Story 21. Plaintiff had an X-ray of an allegedly broken arm. It seemed off to me, and the dates didn't make sense. I was in-house at an academic medical center. I looked at the case more closely and discovered the plaintiff was an X-ray tech at another hospital. After that, it was all over. Story 22. This question reminds me of one of my favorite scenes from Parks and Rec. Please read Exhibit C, the transcript of your Twitter page leading to the immediately following crash. 915, 4 green lights in a row, bless 917, drive faster, blue Civic, Dayon, soccer moms 918, gotta pass this lady on Edgekirch. That's when I hit the fire hydrant. Sorry, allegedly hit the fire hydrant. 920, just hit a fire hydrant, but I survived. Unbreakable. What's Mr. Glassoptothicides? Why no sequel? Prosecution rests, Your Honor. Story 23. My only full trial. Contractor ripping off my client who was no saint. I went through entire contract where each sub was listed and he agreed to each line as being part of contract. He agreed that amount was to be paid to the subs. He agreed to the total. What he failed to do was list any profit. My last question was, where is your profit in this contract? No answer from him. As written, he was working for free. Case dismissed by judge without me having to present my side. Story 24. I was trying to get a restraining order for a woman in DV court from her son's father. We are presenting testimony and she details a story where he grabbed her arm and slammed it on the tub, breaking her wrist. On cross, I asked the accused if he ever broke my client's wrist on purpose. His response, yeah, I did. She was 9 months pregnant, about to smoke crack and wouldn't stop. I tried to grab her arm to get the pipe and protect my unborn son. She left that detail out in her conversations with me. My client was a woman working at a meat packing plant. Her glove, they would only give her the loose kind because they were cheaper, got caught in the machine and she lost her arm. We sued the owners of the plant for the glove issue. We also sued the machine manufacturer for failing to include the required guard. Then we sued the distributor for being in the chain of the sale but didn't really think they played much of a role. The manufacturer swore they included a handguard and said the plant owner must have used a grinder to take it off. During a deposition of the guy that owned the distraction company, he shows up with the sale documents he was supposed to have turned over weeks before. Turns out there was a note in small print at the bottom he didn't know about that said the sale was without the handguard, which is against the law. I pointed it out and we ended up settling that afternoon with the distributor. The woman got all her medical bills paid, got money for a prosthetic and got a bunch of pain and suffering damages. Story 25. Not a lawyer, but one time I represented myself in a speeding ticket dispute. The officer supposedly caught me speeding with his radar. After he finished presenting his case, I got to cross-examine him. Now he was pretty good about providing evidence for the radar unit's accuracy, saying that Head tested the radar before and after his shift with the tuning forks the radar came with. He even had the factory certificates for the tuning forks, but what he didn't realize was that the certificates were dated 1995. And I knew that those forks hadn't been recertified calibrated since they'd left the factory in 1995, because calibrating tuning forks just wasn't standard procedure for my local PD. So I laid all of that out, and asked how he could be sure that the radar was accurate, since we couldn't be sure that the tuning forks Head used were accurate. He just kind of went on a long ramble about how Head been using the radar unit for a long time and how it always worked well. At that point I was feeling pretty good and I thought ID had him, but the judge found me guilty anyway, saying that the officer's visual speed estimation was enough to convict even if the radar evidence is in question. Edit 1. To those of you asking, I'm pretty sure I wasn't speeding, though I have to admit I wasn't paying too much attention. It was like 2 a.m. on an empty highway. If I was, it was definitely by no more than 10 km/h, around 2 miles per hour, the inattention kind of speeding as opposed to going for a top speed run. I was honestly not too salty about losing. I mean, it's just a speeding ticket, happens. What was slightly concerning was the judge's willingness to convict on so little evidence, which to me doesn't really bode too well for the integrity of the whole system. And no, to the lawyers among you, it wasn't preponderance of evidence, it was beyond a reasonable doubt. Traffic offenses follow a criminal procedure here in BC, too. Added the arm back in. Thanks guys. Never posted this before, ex-wife EX trying to fight ex-husband's new girlfriend NG. NG is in her car trying to flee while EX is beating on car, blocking escape, and grabbing at door handles to get in. But doors are locked. After EX briefly moved out from the path of the car, NG begins to drive away slowly. EX, noticing the car starting to leave, dives onto the hood of the car. Slides off, gets run over at slow speed, and breaks bones. Several surgeries later, EX sues NG, alleging negligence in hitting EX with the car. As in deposing EX, she claims to have never touched the car before it hit her, never punched or kicked the car, never broke the windshield wipers, never grabbed the door handle to try to open the door, never dove on the hood, just yelling. I asked what NG was doing during this time, and EX describes NG as deer in headlights, staring straight ahead, locked in her car, both hands on the steering wheel. How did you know the doors were locked? That one got dismissed pretty quickly. Edit videotape deposition 2, made sure that one was recorded. Story 26 Lady got into a minor fender bender with a truck in a casino parking lot. She backed out of a spot into him. My guy said she parked and went inside the casino for a few hours. At her deposition, she testified that she was so hurt she went right home and to a hospital. I asked if she was a frequent visitor of casino, and if she had a rewards card. She was happy to tell me she did and she had gold status, and showed me the card. I subpoenaed her rewards cards records, and it showed she was playing slots for hours after the accident. Story 27 When I was a prosecutor a long time ago, I was to charge some kid who had been accused of killing his father. It looked like a pretty open and shut case. There was lots of evidence against him. He was due for a death sentence. But then the jury came back with not guilty. I pulled one of them aside afterwards to see what happened. Turned out one juror had changed the whole thing around, twisting all the evidence to point out every flaw in the case. The switchblade used as the murder weapon was a very common one. The witness was so old and feeble-sighted she probably couldn't see much, and the shorter defendant probably couldn't have pulled off the downward stab that killed the man. All just enough evidence to decide that there was reasonable doubt. Juror 8 took apart my whole case. TLDR ex-wife gave away custody of my daughter while angrily arguing with the judge. Not a lawyer. Was taking my ex to court over custody of my kid. I had compiled a 150-page dossier complete with a report from Child Protective Services since there was abuse in a household. Text messages and tons of records of contempt of our previous agreement. My daughter has a court-assigned lawyer that is normal in these cases, which after reading through all the materials and talking to all the parties sided with my lawyer and I, the ex decided to represent themselves because, hubris I suppose. Before the case was heard in the hallway outside of the courtroom she gave me an agreement she typed up which would grant me custody as well as some generous provisions for herself. I politely declined as we were confident we would be getting a lot more in trail. Case was called, Testimonies in. She put on the most hilariously insane and embarrassing show for the court. In her closing testimony she attempted to hand the judge the agreement she tried to give us. Judge refused to take it. You can't just hand me things. That's not how you submit things into evidence. I'm not reading that. She's arguing with the judge, yelling at him, and losing her. In the insane nonsense she was spewing she said, and this agreement gives him custody which is one of the things he's after. In what I assume was an attempt to show that she's attempting a compromise. My lawyer peppers in a quick statement, okay, so you agree for the father to have full custody. She snaps in heated anger, yes that's what I agreed to. Our side falls completely silent and the judge after much effort ends her little outburst. Gave his final verdict which started with granting me custody and putting her in court-mandated therapy. She literally gave away custody of her daughter in a heated argument with the judge. Story 28 My client was being sued in China. We decided to sue them in US to convince the Chinese judge to dismiss the case so it can be heard in the US. We filed suit, and we got the other side to accept service. During the Chinese court hearing, the opposition wanted to have the Chinese court hear the case, but Chinese lawyers got shut down because they signed for the service in the US, implying that the US court is the proper jurisdiction and venue. Edit the opposing Chinese lawyers were fired the next day. Story 29 I represent tenants in eviction proceedings. Landlords being landlords. I have lots of gotcha stories. The most recent one was last week, in a classic he said, she said case. That is, the entire case depended upon whom the jury believed. When the landlord was sworn in prior to testifying, she unnecessarily said yes on the Bible. When asked to tell the truth, the whole truth etc., her testimony however was evasive. She avoided answering almost every one of my questions. She even avoided answering some of her own lawyer's questions. During a recess, but still in the middle of her testimony, she was seen outside the courtroom, in full view of the jury, whispering with her lawyer and a family member about, obviously, what she was supposed to say on the stand. When she got back up, the first thing I did was ask her what she was talking about with her lawyer and her family member outside the courtroom. I demanded to know whether they were telling her how to answer my questions. Her lawyer objected. The judge overruled the objection and ordered the witness to answer. The witness responded, "My life is my life." During closing arguments, her lawyer tried to argue that she must have been telling the truth because she swore on the Bible even though she didn't have to. That meant, according to him, that she took her oath more seriously than the average person impliedly. My client who wouldn't bother swearing on a Bible when not asked to do so. In my response, I agreed with the landlord's counsel that his client must take her oath to tell the truth seriously. She must have taken it so seriously, in fact, that she refused to lie under oath when her truthful testimony would have sunk her case, so instead, she just refused to answer almost every question put to her. The jury came back in about 30 minutes with a 12-0 verdict in the tenant's favor. Edit: verdicts in my state do not have to be 12-0. In civil cases a verdict can be reached with 9 votes. In my line of work, unanimous verdicts are rare even in the most obvious cases. Also, the conversation in the hallway was not privileged because there was a third party there. But even if the family member had not been in the conversation, I would still be allowed to ask whether they had discussed her testimony, as long as I don't ask what they said to each other. Story 30 Obligatory IANL. During the Menendez brothers' trial, when Eric was testifying that he and his brother went to the Big Five to purchase handguns in August of 1989, according to Eric, when told that there would be a 15-day waiting period on them, they chose to purchase shotguns instead. Eric even mentioned the case and shelf where the handguns had been sitting. The attorney then paused and said, "Mr. Menendez, did you know that Big Five stopped carrying handguns in March of 1986? Edit: thank you to Ms. Matayo for linking the article that explains why this was such a big deal. It basically undermined the credibility of the Menendez brothers' testimony since they were caught lying under oath about the guns, which also made people believe that the molestation accusations against their father were also lies. The initial trial was deadlocked, however the second trial saw them both convicted of the murders." Edit 2 Here is a link to the video that shows the testimony in question. If the timestamp doesn't work, it starts at about 1607. Story 31 IANL. But I was a key witness once. The crime scene: a big street fair in a mid-sized California city. An alleyway leading to the fair was blocked off. A brand new white BMW was crawling up the alley, sloppily weaving between all the parked cars, tight fit. At the end of the alley, the driver discovered the barricade. She drove over a barbecue cover, which jumped up with a big clang. She put the car in park and got out to inspect the damage. As she peered at her fender, I explained she had run over the barbecue cover, no harm done. The driver, blonde woman, about 30 years old, got back into the BMW, revved the engine, then shot forward through the barricade and smashed into the crowd. People, including a young child, were thrown into the air. There were many injuries. She was arrested for DUI, reckless driving, and many other offenses. In court, the defense lawyer was the father of one of my buddies, which was awkward. Her defense revolved around her claim that driving into the crowd was an oopsie and not a voluntary act. The examination went like this: lawyer: Mr. Ted, had you been drinking that night? Me: yes, I had exactly one small beer, a Budweiser, at the adjacent bar. Lawyer: just one beer? Me: yes, exactly one, a small 7-ounce glass of Budweiser. Lawyer: you sure? Me: yes, I'm sure. Lawyer: then you left the bar? Me: yes, I went on to explain everything. I saw the BMW crawling up the alley, hitting the barbecue cover, the exasperated driver revving the engine, smashing through the barricade, then smashing into the crowd. Lawyer: you say the vehicle accelerated from a dead stop? Me: yes, the vehicle was completely still, as if in park. The driver got in, revved it, then accelerated through the barricade. The defense claims she was already moving and merely sailed through the barricade because oops, my testimony destroyed that claim. Lawyer: so how fast would you say she was going when she went through the barricade? Me: I don't know. Lawyer: can't you hazard a guess? Was it fast, slow, what? Me: I don't know. The vehicle was accelerating from a dead stop to a very high rate of speed. Lawyer: but you don't know how fast it was going. Me: it was going as fast as a BMW 318 I can go when you stomp on the accelerator and smash into a crowd of people about 50 yards away. That fast. I think some calculus might be involved when you determine average speed of a BMW that goes from a dead stop to smashing into people across a specific distance. Lawyer: I have no further questions for this witness. And no, everybody did not clap, but I did sink his defense. She was found guilty and did about 3 years in prison. About 5 years later, I went to the grocery store and she was working the register. I felt really nervous, but she had no idea who I was.